They say a man's legacy is built over a lifetime, but it can be dismantled in an afternoon. I survived a widowmaker heart attack, only to come home and find a roll-off dumpster sitting in my driveway. Inside it, my entire life. So, I grabbed a pen, and I ended his. You don't really die like they show in the movies. There's no grand flashback, no swelling orchestral music, no profound sense of peace washing over you. For me, it felt like an anvil had been dropped squarely onto my chest in the middle of the frozen food aisle at the grocery store. I remember the fluorescent lights flickering. I remember the cold tile against my cheek. I remember the smell of floor wax and the panicked shouts of a teenage cashier whose name tag read Toby. Then, nothing. When I woke up, time had ceased to mean anything. I was pinned to a bed in the intensive care unit, tethered to reality by a labyrinth of clear plastic tubing and the ceaseless rhythmic hiss-click of a ventilator forcing air into my lungs. My mouth tasted like rust and old gauze. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move my arms without triggering a sharp, electric agony that shot down my sternum. I was 68 years old. My name is Arthur. And according to the grim-faced cardiologist who eventually hovered over my bed, I had suffered a massive myocardial infarction. I was dead for 3 minutes before the paramedics shocked my heart back into a reluctant, staggering rhythm. The ICU is a purgatory of white noise. You lie there, stripped of your dignity, wearing a gown that leaves your backside exposed to drafts and strangers. You listen to the alarms of other people's failing bodies. You listen to the soft, urgent whispers of nurses. And you wait. On the third day, they pulled the tube out of my throat. It felt like swallowing sandpaper wrapped in barbed wire. On the fourth day, my son Jason finally came to visit. Jason is 34. He works in commercial real estate, drives a leased German sedan he can't really afford, and wears suits that look too tight around the shoulders. He walked into my room holding a paper cup of overpriced coffee, his eyes darting to the monitors before they ever settled on me. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice was too loud for the hushed reverence of the ICU. "Jesus, you look like hell." "Feel like it too," I managed to croak. My voice sounded thin, brittle, an old man's voice. I hated it. Jason didn't sit down. He stood at the foot of the bed, shifting his weight from his left foot to his right. He kept checking his phone. The screen would light up, casting a pale blue glow over his face, and his thumb would swipe away whatever notification had interrupted his filial duty. "Rebecca sends her love," he said, not looking up from the screen. "She couldn't make it. The kids have soccer, and, well, you know how it is." I did know how it was. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, hadn't willingly spent more than 45 minutes in my presence since the wedding 10 years ago. I was too quiet for her. "My house smelled like old wood and dust," she once complained. She preferred things modern, sterile, easily photographed, much like my son. "How long do they have you in here?" Jason asked, finally sliding his phone into his jacket pocket. "A few more days in ICU, then a step-down unit, maybe a week total if my numbers hold." Jason nodded slowly. A strange look washed over his face. It wasn't relief. It wasn't even pity. It looked, disturbingly, like calculation. His eyes drifted over the machines keeping me alive, tracing the wires, assessing the damage. "The doctor said it was close," Jason murmured, almost to himself. "Really close." "Missed the Grim Reaper by an inch," I said, trying to force a weak smile. Jason didn't smile back. "Right. Well, you just rest up. Focus on getting better. Don't worry about the house or the bills. I've got it handled. I'm taking care of everything." At the time, those words sounded like grace. I had raised Jason alone since he was 14, after his mother, Sarah, passed away from breast cancer. We had clashed. As fathers and sons do, I was a man who built furniture with my hands, who valued sweat and patience. He was a boy who wanted things fast, loud, and shiny. But in that sterile hospital room, hopped up on morphine and exhaustion, I felt a flicker of genuine warmth. My boy was stepping up. He was taking care of his old man. I fell asleep that afternoon thinking how proud Sarah would be. I fell asleep believing my life was safe in his hands. I was an idiot. The rest of my hospital stay was a blur of blood draws, physical therapy that felt like torture, and bad jello. 10 days after the anvil dropped on my chest, the doctor signed my discharge papers. I was weak. I had a bottle of nitroglycerin pills in my pocket and a strict regimen of beta blockers. But I was alive. Jason didn't come to pick me up. He texted my nurse saying he was stuck in a closing meeting. Instead, my neighbor, an 80-year-old retired mechanic named Henry, drove his rattling 1,998 Ford Ranger to the hospital loading zone. "You look like a stiff breeze would knock you into next week, Artie," Henry grunted as I gingerly climbed into the passenger seat, wincing as the seatbelt pressed against my bruised chest. "Just get me home, Henry," I sighed, closing my eyes. "I just want to sit in my own chair. I want to smell my own house. I wanted the scent of the cherry wood I was turning in the garage. I wanted the sight of Sarah's worn, faded quilt draped over the back of the sofa. I wanted the tangible proof that I existed, that I had a life waiting for me." Henry put the truck in gear. "Sure thing, Artie. Though, I gotta ask." He hesitated, gripping the steering wheel. "You having some work done on the place?" I opened my eyes. "Work? No. Why?" Henry wouldn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead at the road. "No reason. Just, you'll see when we get there." We turned onto Maple Drive, the street I had lived on for 40 years. I bought the house with Sarah back when the oak trees in the front yards were nothing but skinny saplings. Now, their branches canopied the road, casting dappled afternoon shadows on the pavement. As Henry's truck crawled toward my driveway, I saw it. A massive, rusted steel roll-off dumpster sat squat on my front lawn, crushing the hydrangeas Sarah had planted. A white moving van was backed up to the front porch. Two men in matching gray t-shirts were carrying a familiar piece of furniture down the steps. It was my dining room table, the one I had built by hand from reclaimed mahogany when Jason was 6 years old. "Stop the truck," I whispered. My chest tightened. A jolt of panic, sharp and hot, spiked my heart rate. I fumbled for the nitro pills in my pocket, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. "Artie, take it easy," Henry said, slamming on the brakes. I didn't wait for him to park properly. I threw the passenger door open and stumbled out. My legs felt like wet cement. I leaned heavily against the side of the truck, gasping for air, watching as the movers casually loaded the table into the back of the van. "Hey," I yelled. It came out as a weak, reedy rasp. I tried again, pushing from my diaphragm, ignoring the searing pain in my chest. "Hey, put that down." One of the movers, a kid who couldn't have been older than 20, paused and wiped sweat from his forehead. "You the owner's dad? Jason told us you were getting discharged next week. We're almost done here." "I am the owner," I ground out, forcing myself to walk up the driveway. Every step was a battle. "What the hell is going on here?" "Estate clean out," the kid said, looking confused. He pulled a clipboard from the back of the van. "Jason hired us. Said the homeowner was transitioning to a care facility, and the property was being prepped for staging." Transitioning to a care facility. The words hit me harder than the heart attack. I pushed past the kid, ignoring his protests, and walked through my open front door. The silence inside was the first thing that struck me. When you live in a house for 4 decades, it absorbs your life. The furniture, the rugs, the books, they all absorb the sound. But now, my heavy, labored breathing echoed off the bare walls. The living room was gone. My leather recliner, the one with the permanent impression of my back, was missing. The bookshelves I had built to house Sarah's collection of first editions were empty, stripped to the bare oak. The faded Persian rug that tied the room together was gone, leaving behind a pristine rectangular outline of clean hardwood amidst the surrounding layer of settled dust. I stumbled into the kitchen. The vintage Pyrex bowls Sarah loved, gone. The heavy cast iron skillets I seasoned religiously, gone. The corkboard by the fridge, which held Jason's old report cards and Polaroids from our road trip to Yellowstone. Body. I was standing in the hollowed-out carcass of my life. Bile rose in my throat. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. Jason hadn't been taking care of my house. He had been liquidating it. He had looked at me in that ICU bed, calculated the odds of my survival, and decided I was already a ghost. To him, my home wasn't a sanctuary. It was an asset class. "Artie," Henry's voice called out nervously from the front door. "You all right in there? Want me to call the cops?" "No," I managed to say. I forced myself to let go of the counter. I turned toward the back of the house, toward my sanctuary, the garage. My boots dragged across the linoleum as I pushed open the heavy fire door leading to the garage workshop. I flipped the light switch. My knees buckled. I actually hit the concrete floor, my hands scraping against the rough ground. My tools, my beautiful, meticulously cared-for tools, the 1952 Stanley No. 4 smooth plane with the cracked rosewood tote, the Japanese pull saws, the chisels I spent hours sharpening on wet stones, the half-finished cherry wood crib I was building for Jason's youngest. All of it was gone. The pegboards were barren, leaving only faint grease outlines of where the tools used to hang. But it wasn't the theft of the tools that broke me. It was the corner desk. In the corner of the garage, I kept an old steel tanker desk. Inside the bottom drawer, locked away from humidity and light, were Sarah's journals. 30 years of her handwriting, her thoughts, her fears during the chemo, her hopes for Jason. It was the only piece of her mind I had left. The desk was there, but the drawers were yanked open, empty. A cold, terrifying dread seized my stomach. I scrambled up, my heart protesting wildly, and staggered out the side door of the garage toward the front yard, toward the roll-off dumpster. I climbed the side rungs of the steel beast. The metal was hot under the afternoon sun. I hauled my upper body over the edge, the rough rim digging into my healing chest, and looked down into the trash. It was a graveyard of my existence, buried under black trash bags, broken drywall from some bathroom update they had already started, and fast food wrappers left by the movers. I saw it. The pale blue floral cover of Sarah's 1989 journal. "No," I choked out. "No, no, no." I didn't care about my heart. I didn't care about the tearing sensation in my chest. I threw my leg over the side and dropped into the dumpster. I landed hard on a pile of refuse, my ankle twisting, but I didn't stop. I dug furiously. I tore open trash bags. I found the cigar box of matchbooks Sarah and I collected from every diner on Route 66. It had been crushed, the matchbooks scattered through coffee grounds and rotten food. I found my discharge papers from the Navy, torn in half. I found the hand-painted ceramic mug Jason made me for Father's Day when he was 8, the one that said "World's Okayest Dad" shattered into a dozen pieces. And I found the journals. 3 of them were relatively unscathed. 2 were soaked in some foul-smelling sticky liquid, the ink bleeding through the pages, turning Sarah's beautiful cursive into illegible blue smears. I sat there in the filth, holding the ruined books to my chest. The smell of garbage and rotting food was overpowering, but I couldn't move. A man shouldn't outlive his own life. He shouldn't have to sift through a dumpster to find the proof that he mattered to someone. I sat there until the movers finished loading the van. I sat there until the sun began to dip below the oak trees, casting long, dark shadows over the yard. I didn't cry. The grief was too dense, too heavy for tears. It sat in my gut like a stone. Eventually, Henry came to the edge of the dumpster. He didn't say a word. He just reached down, his weathered, grease-stained hands grasping mine, and pulled me up. "Let's get you inside, Artie," he said softly. We walked back into the empty house. Henry dragged an old lawn chair from his own patio and set it up in the middle of my bare living room so I'd have a place to sit. He offered to stay, to order a pizza, but I told him to go. I needed to be alone. I sat in the lawn chair as the darkness crept into the house. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, holding the damp, ruined journals in my lap. And then, slowly, The heavy stone of grief in my gut began to heat up. It cracked, it splintered, and from the center of it poured a cold, pure, absolute rage. At 8 p.m., my cell phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It was Jason. I stared at the caller ID, the glowing letters burning into the dark room. I let it ring. He called again, and again. On the fourth try, I swiped the screen and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. Dad, what the hell is going on? Jason's voice was tight, vibrating with a mix of panic and annoyance. The estate liquidators just called me. They said some crazy old guy showed up, claimed to be you, and shut the whole operation down. It was me, Jason. My voice was eerily calm. The rasp was gone. Dead silence on the other end. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the faint static of the cellular connection. Dad, he finally whispered, You're not supposed to be discharged until Thursday. You're supposed to go to Pine Valley Transitional Care. Who decided that, Jason? I didn't sign any transfer papers. Rebecca and I. We talked to the social worker. They said you'd need round-the-clock care. You almost died, Dad. You can't live in that house anymore. It's too big. Too much upkeep. He was talking fast now, backpedaling, trying to construct a logical defense for an unforgivable offense. So you decided to sell my home out from under me while I was on a ventilator? We were trying to get ahead of it. Jason's voice rose, defensive and sharp. Do you have any idea how much medical debt you're going to have? We needed to liquidate the assets. The market is hot right now. We were doing this for you, to protect your care, to protect my care. I repeated, tasting the lie on my tongue. Where is my dining room table? Jason. Dad, listen. Where is the table? He sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound. We sent it to a consignment shop downtown. It doesn't fit the aesthetic of the new builds, Dad. Nobody wants heavy, dark wood anymore. We're trying to maximize the staging value. And the tools in the garage? Sold to a collector in Ohio. Look, I got $3,000 for the lot. That's a good return. I closed my eyes. The image of his tight suits, his leased car, his shiny, empty life flashed in my mind. And your mother's journals, Jason? Did you get a good return on those when you threw them in the trash? Another silence. This one wasn't shocked. It was uncomfortable. Dad, I didn't know what those were. It was just a bunch of old notebooks and a rusty desk. The house was full of clutter. You have to admit, you keep too much stuff. We had to move fast. Clutter. 30 years of his mother's soul reduced to clutter. You didn't look inside, I said, stating a fact, not asking a question. You didn't open a single one. I was busy coordinating the contractors. I have a job, Dad. I have a family. I can't spend 3 weeks sorting through every piece of paper in that dust trap. He was angry now. Angry at me for surviving. Angry at me for inconveniencing his neat little liquidation plan. He had mentally spent the inheritance, I realized. The house, the tools, the assets. He had probably already budgeted the equity for a down payment on a bigger house for Rebecca, or to pay off his leased car. My survival was a financial disaster for him. Don't come to the house, Jason, I said softly. Dad, be reasonable. The stagers are coming tomorrow. We need to. If you or your wife step foot on my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing. If any of your contractors show up, I will call the police. You can't do that. I have power of attorney. Medical power of attorney, I corrected him, which is revoked the second I am of sound mind and body. I'm sitting in my living room, Jason. I am perfectly sound. Dad, you're acting crazy. The heart attack messed with your head. Let me come over. Let me explain. Goodbye, Jason. I hung up the phone. I powered it off. I set it on the floor next to the lawn chair. The silence returned, but it didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt expectant. I sat in the dark for hours. The moonlight drifted across the bare hardwood floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I thought about the man I had raised. I thought about where I had gone wrong, Had I not taught him the value of history? Had I sheltered him too much after Sarah died, trying to buy his love with leniency instead of instilling respect? It didn't matter. The boy I raised was gone. The man who replaced him was a stranger who viewed me as a decaying obstacle, standing between him and a payout. The clock on the kitchen wall, one of the few things the liquidators had left behind, ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. I looked up. The glowing green hands pointed to 3:15 a.m. My chest was aching, a dull throb that reminded me of my mortality. The doctor had said my heart was permanently damaged. I might have 5 years. I might have 5 months. I might not wake up tomorrow. And if I didn't wake up tomorrow, the house, the bank accounts, the life insurance, everything I had bled and sweated for over 45 years would default to Jason. He would finish the job. He would wipe my existence from the earth and spend the proceeds on a kitchen remodel. I pushed myself up from the lawn chair. My joints popped in the quiet house. I walked into the kitchen and opened the junk drawer. Miraculously, a single, cheap, yellow legal pad and a black ballpoint pen had survived the purge. I carried them back to the living room. I sat down on the floor, crossing my legs despite the stiffness in my knees. I placed the yellow pad on my lap. In my state, a holographic will, a will written entirely in the handwriting of the testator, is legally binding. It requires no witnesses. It just requires my hand, my signature, and my absolute intent. I clicked the pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't agonize over the wording. The anger guided my hand, making my cursive sharp and aggressive, entirely unlike my usual sprawling script. I, Arthur Pendleton, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils. I wrote about the house on Maple Drive, valued at roughly $600,000, paid off, free and clear. I wrote about my savings accounts, the life insurance policy, the mutual funds. Then came the allocations. To my son, Jason Pendleton. I paused. I looked at the ruined journals sitting next to me on the floor. I thought of the matchbooks in the coffee grounds. I thought of the cold, dismissive tone in his voice. It was just clutter. To my son, Jason Pendleton, I leave the sum of $1. $1. I underlined it twice. I wanted it to be legally undeniable. I didn't want him contesting it, claiming I forgot him in my old age or was medically unfit. I wanted the probate judge to see exactly what I meant. I leave him this sum, so that the court may know he was not forgotten, but intentionally excluded. He has already taken what he felt was owed to him. He will receive nothing more. My hand was cramping, but I couldn't stop. I had to redirect the rest. If Jason wasn't getting it, who was? I didn't have any other children. Sarah's family had mostly passed on or drifted away. I thought about the people who had actually treated me like a human being in the last month. The entirety of my estate, including the property on Maple Drive and all liquid assets, is to be sold. The proceeds shall be divided into 3 equal parts. Part 1 shall be given to Henry Miller, my neighbor, in gratitude for his unwavering friendship and for not leaving me in a dumpster. Part 2 shall be donated to the Cardiovascular Research Department of St. Jude's Hospital. Part 3. I stared at the paper. Part 3. I thought back to the ICU, to the teenager who had been wiping down the floors when I woke up from my delirium, to the young moving kid who looked guilty when I confronted him, to the people who actually worked with their hands. Part 3 shall be established as a scholarship fund at the local community college, specifically earmarked for students entering the vocational trades, carpentry, plumbing, and electrical. Because this world has enough real estate developers, and not enough people who know how to build a table. I signed the bottom. I dated it. 3:15 a.m., June 16th. I set the pen down. I stared at the yellow paper. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a weapon. It was a shield. It was the last piece of woodworking I would ever do. I was carving my son completely out of my life. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into an envelope I found in the drawer, and wrote my lawyer's name, Tom, on the front. I leaned back against the wall, the envelope resting on my chest. For the first time since the heart attack, my breathing felt easy. The heavy, suffocating pressure was gone. The house was empty. My tools were gone, and my body was failing. But I had never felt more powerful. Tomorrow, I would call Tom. Tomorrow, I would find a way to buy back my dining room table. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But for tonight, at 3:15 a.m., surrounded by the ghosts of my stolen life, I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. Morning arrived not with a gentle sunrise, but with the harsh glare of reality. The floorboards were cold against my stiff joints as I pushed myself up. My chest gave a sharp throb, a polite reminder from my heart that I was running on borrowed time. I swallowed my morning pills dry and picked up the envelope. By 8 a.m., I had made 2 phone calls. The first was to Mike, an independent locksmith who operated out of a battered Chevy van. The second was to Tom. Tom was an estate lawyer of the old breed. He didn't wear flashy suits or advertise on billboards. He wore suspenders, kept a jar of butterscotch candies on his desk, and possessed the legal cunning of a starved coyote. He arrived at my house less than an hour after I called, carrying a battered leather briefcase. He didn't comment on the empty living room. He didn't ask why I was sitting in a frayed lawn chair. He simply took the yellow legal pad from the envelope, adjusted his bifocals, and read. For 5 minutes, the only sound in the house was the scrape of Mike the locksmith drilling out the front door deadbolt. "Artie," Tom finally said, looking up over the rims of his glasses. "This is ruthless. Is it legal?" "It's a holographic will, written entirely in your hand. Under state law, yes, it's binding. But Jason will contest it. He'll argue diminished capacity. He'll say the hypoxia from the heart attack impaired your judgment." "Let him try," I said. "I want you to draft a formal version today. Typed, witnessed, notarized. Lock it down so tight a team of Supreme Court justices couldn't pry it open." "And Tom?" "Yeah, Artie, I need a restraining order." Tom sighed, pulling a legal pad of his own from his briefcase. He didn't argue. He just started writing. By noon, Tom was gone, armed with a retainer check and my instructions. Mike had finished his work, leaving me with 3 heavy brass keys. The new deadbolts felt solid, substantial. They snapped into place with a heavy, metallic clunk that echoed through the bare walls. It was the sound of a boundary being drawn in iron. At 1:30 p.m., the staging crew arrived. I watched through the front window as a white van pulled up behind Jason's leased BMW. My son stepped out of his car, wearing a sharp navy suit, looking every bit the young, successful executive. He was talking animatedly to a woman holding a clipboard, gesturing toward my front porch. I stood by the door. I didn't open it. I heard Jason's dress shoes click up the wooden steps. I heard the handle jiggle. Then, a pause. He rattled the knob harder. "Dad," he called out, his voice muffled by the heavy oak door. "Dad, unlock the door. The stagers are here. We have a schedule to keep." I engaged the chain lock and pulled the door open exactly 3 inches. Jason stepped back, his face flushing with irritation. "What are you doing? Open the door. You're embarrassing me in front of the contractors." "The contractors can go home, Jason," I said. My voice was calm. It wasn't the reedy rasp from yesterday. It was steady. "There's no staging happening today. There's no sale happening. Ever." "Dad, stop this. You're having an episode. You need to be at the care facility. I'm trying to help you." He pushed his hand against the door, trying to force it open, but the heavy steel chain held fast. "Help yourself, you mean?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You over-leveraged yourself on that new condo development, didn't you? Or is it the car?" "You looked at my medical chart, saw a failing heart, and saw a bailout." His jaw tightened. The facade of the caring son slipped, revealing the panicked, angry debtor underneath. "You owe a fortune in medical bills. You can't afford to keep this place." "I have power of attorney." "Revoked," I stated. "Tom filed the paperwork an hour ago. You have no legal authority over my medical care, my finances, or this property. And if you don't take your contractors and leave my property in exactly 2 minutes, I'm calling the police and having you trespassed." Jason stared at me, really stared. I think it was the first time in 10 years he actually saw me as a man, and not just an aging fixture in his periphery. He saw the cold, unyielding reality in my eyes. "You're out of your mind," he spat, his voice dropping into a vicious hiss. "You're a bitter, dying old man. You think you can just shut me out? I'm your son. You threw your mother's journals in a dumpster." I replied quietly. "You stopped being my son the moment you did that." I closed the door. The heavy clunk of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the final word. I stood in the entryway and listened. I heard Jason arguing with the staging woman. I heard car doors slamming. I heard engines revving in frustration. And then I heard tires peeling out of my driveway. Silence returned to the house. But this time, it was a peaceful silence. It took me 3 days to track down the dining room table. Jason had sold it to a high-end consignment boutique 2 towns over. When I walked into the shop, wearing my worn jeans and a flannel shirt, the manager eyed me with suspicion. But when I spotted the table in the back corner, sitting under a gaudy chandelier, my chest tightened with something that had nothing to do with my failing heart. I walked my fingers across the mahogany surface. I felt the tiny imperfection near the center, a slight dip in the wood where the sander had slipped 30 years ago. It was mine. I bought it back. It cost me exactly double what the shop had paid Jason for it. I didn't care. I paid in cash, pulling the crisp bills from an envelope Tom had brought me from the bank. Henry drove his truck down to help me haul it home. We didn't hire movers. We took our time. Henry took the heavy end, and we shuffled it up the front steps, inch by agonizing inch, until it sat proudly in the center of the dining room once again. It was the only piece of furniture in the room. It looked magnificent. "You know, Artie," Henry panted, wiping his forehead with a shop rag, "you're a stubborn son of a bitch." "I'm aware," I said, pulling 2 cold bottles of root beer from the fridge. I handed him one. We sat at the table in the empty room. We didn't talk about Jason. We didn't talk about the heart attack. We just drank our root beer and watched the afternoon sun filter through the front window, casting a warm, golden glow over the reclaimed mahogany. In the months that followed, my life settled into a quiet, deliberate rhythm. The house remained mostly empty. I didn't see the point in replacing the couches or the rugs. I bought a comfortable armchair, a reading lamp, and a small radio. That was all I needed. My mornings were spent at the dining room table. I would carefully peel apart the sticky, ruined pages of Sarah's journals. Using a magnifying glass, I deciphered the smeared blue ink, translating her fading words into fresh notebooks. It was painstaking work. Sometimes I could only recover a sentence or 2 a day, but every word felt like a victory. I was saving her. I was keeping the proof of us alive. Jason tried to fight the new will. He hired a flashy lawyer who sent Tom a barrage of threatening letters, demanding medical evaluations and financial audits. Tom handled them all with the casual grace of a man swatting away gnats. The legal fees quickly drained Jason's remaining capital. Eventually, the letters stopped. The silence became permanent. "I don't know how much time I have left. The doctors say my heart is operating at 40% capacity. I get winded walking up the stairs. I take my nitro pills. I sleep more than I used to, but I am not afraid. A man's legacy isn't the house he leaves behind. It's not the bank accounts or the shiny cars. It's the respect he commands. It's the boundaries he draws. It's the knowledge that when he finally closes his eyes for the last time, he does so on his own terms. When my time comes, this house will be sold. Henry will get his cut, and I hope he buys a new truck. St. Jude's will get their funding, and somewhere out there, some young kid with calloused hands and a worn tool belt will get a scholarship. He'll learn how to use a block plane. He'll learn the difference between pine and oak. He'll learn how to build something that lasts. And Jason gets $1, and a very clear understanding of exactly what he is worth. If this story struck a nerve with you, you aren't alone. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with the people who share our last name, and setting boundaries is the only way to survive. If you want more grounded, real, and unapologetic stories about life, family, and standing your ground, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.